Hi, I'm Tammy Potter, and welcome to the Pregnancy Process Podcast, a show designed to help you navigate the hugely transformative journey to motherhood, where you'll hear the unique experience of experts in this area and the incredible stories of women sharing their conception, pregnancy, and postnatal journeys so that you can have a healthier, more informed pregnancy. And in today's episode, I speak to founder of Sound Sleep Baby, Samantha Toy. It was after not receiving the support she genuinely needed through her journey with postnatal depression and anxiety, and having a son who was taking over 4 hours to fall asleep at bedtime and only napping 20 minutes during the day, that Samantha made the decision to retrain from a teacher to an infant and child sleep consultant. And as someone who is personally mildly obsessed with sleep, and knowing this is an extremely hot topic when it comes to motherhood and parenting, in today's episode, we'll be talking all things sleep. We'll talk about the various sleep training methods, then dial down on the one that Samantha chose that really aligned with her core values, her parenting philosophy, and one that would support her through her journey with postnatal depression and anxiety. We'll talk the science behind infant and child sleep, attachment theory, the biopsychosocial things that affect sleep, and how developmental milestones impact on sleep. Sam, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. It is fantastic to have you with us.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
Now, I am a huge believer in every woman having a story when it comes to motherhood, irrespective of whether they have children or not. I really feel that no woman gets through this period in their lives without some kind of story. And I know your personal journey has been instrumental in transitioning to sleep consulting. Do you mind briefly walking us through this before we really deep dive into sleep? And I know that you mentioned core values and parenting philosophy. And personally, I love talking core values. Mine are connection, growth, and health. And while we're talking about your own journey, I'd really love for you to include your core values in here and talk a little bit about how your core values helped you determine what type of sleep consultant you're going to be.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, shall we start with a kind of bit of an overview about your story? Because I know it is.
Yeah, absolutely. So I fell pregnant exactly when COVID hit, and my partner was doing FIFO at the time. So I spent majority of my pregnancy on my own, and that was a whole new world to begin with anyway. And then birthing and having a child in the peak of lockdowns, and being in Melbourne, being in the worst lockdowns, feeling so isolated, and that was just a whole nother level that other people hadn't experienced yet. And also being a teacher, like we're so used to being in control because we have to be in control of these kids that are in our classroom. And then you have a baby and you just can't control them. You read all the books and you think, okay, it's just going to go like this. They're going to go to bed at 9 o'clock and I'll feed them 3 hours later and everything's just going to be fine. And then I had a baby that was super colicky and always seemed to be uncomfortable and in pain and just didn't sleep. And it all just spiraled, and not really having that support of people being able to pop in every day and checking on you, and really feeling alone, but also my own type A personality of thinking, I should just know how to do this. Like I shouldn't have to ask for help. I should just be able to do it. And I've got an older sister who's had kids. I'm like, oh, she seemed to cope. What's wrong with me? Why is this just not working? And I got into a really deep, dark spiral of postnatal depression and anxiety. And even that took a while for me to realize that what I'm feeling and what I'm experiencing as a new mum isn't normal. And as a first time mum, you don't know what's normal and what's not. And lots of postnatal appointments were just like telehealth. So you really didn't feel that strong connection with a health provider that you could really turn to and go, is this normal? Am I supposed to be so anxious and worried all the time? Am I supposed to be stressing about them sleeping all the time? Am I supposed to feel this overwhelmed every time they cry? And my son cried a lot. And it got to the point where he'd cry, I'd cry. We barely left the house despite lockdowns because he hated the car, and he would scream in the car, and then I'd be crying trying to drive. And it just became this big whirlwind where we just stayed home and just got deeper and deeper into that kind of dark newborn period of overwhelm. And yeah, and it was just really hard. I found it so much harder than I ever expected it to be. And that's depression and anxiety. I've suffered anxiety quite a bit since I was probably 18. So I was lucky in my pregnancy that I'd already started to see the signs of that anxiety and was seeing a psychologist during my pregnancy anyway, which then continued into my postnatal period. But after having Finn, I just didn't make regular appointments because I was just trying to survive the newborn period. But then after seeking my GP and being recommended to start medication, I got back into regularly seeing my psychologist and working through all this anxiety and overwhelm that I was feeling as a mum. But yeah, and so my biggest thing for me was hearing my child cry. And look, biologically as mums, we are wired to have an emotional response to our children's cry because that's their survival. Like, we need to be able to respond. But it got to a point when Finn was around 5 months and I was barely getting any sleep overnight. He would wake every 2 to 3 hours. My partner was back home in Melbourne. He was working away. So it was just me every night, getting up, responding, breastfeeding back to sleep. And we eventually sought out a sleep consultant to help us get things back on track. And things did improve. I was very adamant with this sleep consultant that I did not want to leave him to cry. I was not going to set a timer and walk out that room and leave him. And they were great in adapting that and giving us some strategies that were responsive. But I felt, and look, being on maternity leave, you've gone from your full-time wage. So money's already a little bit tight, and it's a big investment to make in getting this extra help. And it's a few $100s. I think it was around $400 that I paid for this sleep consultant with 2 weeks support. And at the end of the 2 weeks, I was like, where was my support? I felt robbed that I didn't get what they were advertising. And they are a very popular sleep company. And the thing that drew me in was all these great reviews. Oh, they got us sleeping through the night and all these great things. I'm like, surely it's got to work. And yes, things did improve, but I've since learned that sleep is always changing. There's always things that are going to keep coming up. But at the end of it, yeah, things had improved. I was like, I still want things to be even better for me and for Finn, because his lack of sleep was affecting my sleep, which was then affecting my mental health. And it was just a never-ending cycle. So I eventually went down, I said to my partner, you know what, being a teacher, I just need to feel empowered with the knowledge that I can tackle this myself. So I went down the rabbit hole of looking at different sleep consultancy courses and certifications and learning that there are actual certifications. You can't, many sleep consultants out there, unfortunately, may read a book and then go, oh, I'm a sleep consultant because I've read that these are the strategies and this is just what I'm going to do. And there are people out there, but I went to make sure I was doing an actual certification that gave me the knowledge to really help families the way that I felt I wasn't helped. And so I ended up settling on the Institute of Sensitive Sleep Consulting because it really aligned with my personal values of responding to my child. There is a reason that they're crying, and yes, for babies, that's how they're communicating. But it just hurts my heart to just close the door and let them cry, and a timer to tell me when I should respond to my baby. That does not sit well with me at all. And cried out is never something I'll even consider. It feels dirty saying it in my mouth. Just leave children to cry it out. And even when Finn was little, people were like, oh, just let him cry, he'll be fine. No, I can't do that. And even if someone else was trying to settle him and hearing him cry, I wouldn't leave them to try and settle him for long enough. I'm like, oh, he just needs me. I need him. He needs me. We're going to do it together. And through the Institute of Sensitive Sleep, that's really the route that really resonated with me, about being responsive and gentle and making slow transitions from where you're at to where you want to be. And that's what I have with Sound Sleep as well. I'm about supporting and empowering parents to make the changes that are right for them and their family in their time.
That's amazing. Something that I talk about so much, especially in my world, is that the power in the process is becoming educated around your options. And I think when it comes to all aspects of the pregnancy process, whether you're conception, pregnancy, early postnatal, becoming educated, and knowledge is power. So I can completely understand, based on that journey, why you decided to go down the path that you did. And thank you for sharing that, because I know there is such a huge connection, and I spoke about this recently, between sleep and mental health.
Yeah.
And the idea that you went 5 months of waking every 2 to 3 hours, that's like slow torture.
Yeah.
And that is, sleep deprivation is a form of torture. So
Yeah.
when I think of what I'm like after, and I'm mildly obsessed with sleep, but when I think about what I'm like after one night of bad sleep, of waking in the night, like for a couple of hours, I think of what I would actually be like after 5 months of that.
Yeah.
And I can imagine that I would be in the same kind of place that you were. And it's interesting, that feeling of overwhelm and isolation just keeps coming up again and again. So I feel like this is really something that women are feeling, especially in that early fourth trimester. They are feeling isolated. They are feeling alone. They are feeling overwhelmed, especially when it's your first child. And you probably aren't the only person that thinks you should just know how to do this. But the thing is that no baby has a manual, and no new parent goes home knowing what to do, if you know what I mean. And I definitely think there can be more support around there. And we'll probably talk to this as we get through this conversation, because I'd really like to know what your thoughts are around the support, or the gaps in the support. But I'd like to speak to sleep first.
Yeah.
And when it comes to sleep training, like you've said, it is quite individual. And I feel like there are so many methods out there. And just remember, I don't have children. So like I have zero attachment to any of these methods, and I actually don't know very much about them. So can we talk through the most common methods that there are when it comes to kind of sleep training, and the pros and cons of each? Do you mind? Can we start
absolutely.
there? And just remember, I've got no idea about any of this. So talk to me like I am a complete newbie.
Yeah. Look, it's called sleep training, but I really hate it because there has been such a negative connotation built around that. So you have your real extremists in parenthood, of the ones that'll just go, yep, give me the traditional, what I would call the traditional sleep training methods of controlled crying, or it's commonly known mainly in America, like the Ferber method, and cried out. And then we have the other end of the scale of being responsive and gentle. And then we have the extremists of, that's just babies, they just need you, just wait it out. So there's a real scale of sleep training. So we'll start on the traditional end of your controlled crying and your Ferber method. One in the same is you put your baby down to bed, whether they're crying or happy, you leave the room. If they are hysterical, you leave the room and you set a timer for 2 minutes. You do not re-enter that room until that 2-minute timer is up. And when you re-enter the room, you're not picking your baby up. You're not giving them a cuddle to reassure them and calm them. You are just, mum's here, shh, go to sleep, and you're back out the door within 30 seconds. You might give them a little pat, a little tap, a little rub, but that's it. You're not picking them up and giving them comfort. You leave the room and you're resetting your timer. You may then set your timer for 3 minutes, and you wait for that 3 minutes, and then you go back in. And each time you're leaving that room, that increment increases. So depending on the age of your baby, and sleep training is not recommended for babies under 4 months of old. age, 5 months even better. So they're out of that newborn period. So some will set that increment for every 1 minute, they'll increase it. Some do 2. So you go 2 minutes, 4 minutes, 6 minutes, 8 minutes. And as soon as you get to 10 minutes, you stick at that 10-minute timer. And then when they wake overnight, you're starting at that 10-minute timer before you're responding to them. And like, I'm on the Facebook sleep tip groups, and I see that there are parents that are like, they've been crying for 4 hours and they're still not asleep. What do I do? And I'm like, that poor child, their cortisol levels and stress levels are so high, they can no longer independently calm down. And the big difference in the sleep training world is the difference between settling and soothing. Children can self-settle, which is the act of them falling asleep by themselves from birth. The act of self-soothing, however, is that ability to calm and regulate their own emotions. And that cognitively cannot happen until 6 months of age at the earliest. And that also depends on their temperament. I have a highly sensitive child. At 6 months, there was no way that he could start to self-regulate at all. Even now at 2.5, he really struggles to start to calm and regulate by himself without some co-regulation. So that's one of the main reasons that sleep training isn't recommended early on. But this act of self-settling and setting this timer and falling asleep independently, the longer they're crying, that whole self-soothing part becomes more and more difficult because they are so stressed and they can't independently bring down those cortisol levels. So that's your controlled crying and fervor method. You then have the cry it out, where you literally put them to bed, leave the room, close the door, and never re-enter. I have read of children similar to cry it out, crying for hours, screaming and literally falling asleep because they are exhausted. Not because they've learnt to just fall asleep by themselves, but they are physically and emotionally exhausted because their primary caregiver has not come in to reassure them that they are okay, that they are safe, and that it's okay to go to sleep. My personal opinion is that these methods are not teaching your baby to self-settle. They are definitely not teaching your baby to self-soothe. They are teaching your baby that when they're communicating and crying that they need you, it's teaching them that you're not going to come. So don't bother communicating that you have a need, because no one's going to come and fulfill that need for you. That's my personal opinion. There haven't been any scientific studies on the impact of these methods on children and their psychological future development, because it is cruel. No one would openly, willingly put their child into these studies to then see the lasting impact it has on them, because no one would want to have a negative impact like that on their child. So there is no scientific research about the negative impact that these sleep training methods can have in the long term, which is why I'm all about, as you said before, empowering families with the knowledge to make the right decision for themselves. So even in my sleep guides that I have created and sell, I have how to do these methods in there. So I feel like if that's the right route for parents, here's the information to do it right. If this isn't right for you, here's all your other options, which is more of my responsive, gentle, hands-on methods. And in my years of working with families, I've only ever had one family ask to do controlled crying. They just said, what's the quickest method to get our baby sleeping better? And I said, look, it is controlled crying because you are still responding, and you may see results within a week rather than 2 to 3. But this family actually extended their support with me numerous times because their child didn't respond to controlled crying. They ended up doing more the hands-on, responsive, picking up and cuddling. And within a week, she was sleeping through with that responsive help. So it really depends on the child as well. But I'm all about giving the right information to make informed decisions. And it's never the first option that I give families. It's all about And even in my intake form, I ask, what level of crying are you comfortable with? There is always going to be crying when changes are made for babies, because that's their way of communicating what's going on. Like, why is this changed? This is not what happened before. And we call that protest crying. And I help families to understand the difference between that protest cry and that emotional cry of, no, I really need you right now. And we find that fine line to determine, can we leave them? Are they just protesting and telling me, Mum, I'm not happy about this? Or, no, Mum, I really need you right now. But I'm all about sharing with families that your gut intuition is the thing that you listen to first. And that's the thing that you always follow, not the plan that I've given you that says, maybe try and wait a minute. Or if you're in there settling, you're padding, try and give them 30 seconds before you pick them up. If your gut is telling you, I need to pick them up, you pick them up and you cuddle them then. And they know their baby more than I do. They are with them 24/7. They know what makes them tick. They know if they're really going to escalate and go over the edge. I'm not there. So it's all about them, giving them the tools to really realize how much they can leave, how much they can push, and really trusting that gut intuition of, okay, we can work through this together. And I'm all about, if you want to pick your baby up, pick your baby up. If you want to just try settling them in the cot with some padding and some shushing and putting all the right things into place that their sleep environment is conducive to sleep, then we're giving them those strategies. And it's all about age appropriateness as well. So the older they get, the more hands-on you are, can be the more overstimulating it is for their babies and making them more awake. So talking about, maybe we just sit in the room and maybe we don't do as much hands-on. Then there are some babies that just hate being touched or hate mum picking them up. Like, they're showing you they don't want to be picked up. So try settling in the cot, or try giving them some space. Go to the chair on the other side of the room, or leave the room for a minute, particularly with toddlers. They love to push the boundaries and their never-ending list of demands at bedtime. You got to play that game with him, like, oh, mummy just needs to go to the toilet. I'll be right back. And then you pop back in and you come up with another excuse. Oh my gosh, I left the tap running, and you pop back out and you pop back in. So it's about finding the right fit for your child and your family and what really feels right for you.
That's really interesting. And I feel like we can tie this back into when your own sympathetic nervous system is so flooded from being overwhelmed. How is it even possible for a mum whose central nervous system is so flooded with cortisol because she's so overwhelmed and so stressed and so sleep deprived? And then we're saying you need to tune in to your intuition. There's such a disconnect there already. I personally feel like, because of the type of lives that we live, it's so busy, the modern lives, people aren't really that in tune with their intuition. They're not in tune with their bodies, yet we're trying to tell people to tune into your intuition, and that's the best thing to help you understand what your child wants. But then at the same time, when mum's central nervous system is so flooded and is so overwhelmed that they can't even tune into their own intuition, I can see how that disconnect would start happening, where they actually can't tune in to their intuition, which is telling them what their baby wants. So then they just don't even know what they should be doing. So I can totally see how that cycle would turn into a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
And talking about central nervous systems is so interesting, because you talk about the negative impact, the long-term negative impact, and how we don't know what the long-term psychological negative impact of leaving children who don't know how to self-soothe and self-regulate to do it to themselves. You actually don't know what that can do long-term. And all of this type of stuff is so interesting to me that I can connect the dots almost. If like leaving, and I have no attachment to this, I'm just thinking about it, and based on what you've said, you can almost imagine like the feeling that no one is going to come. I am distressed as a baby. I'm distressed and no one is coming to help. I am all alone. And like, I can just almost see the kind of like the domino effect that can have long term. So
But
that's
even as an adult, if you're living with a partner or something and you're distressed and crying, imagine if they saw that and just went about their day in the house and just ignored you. And you're like,
can't even.
hello.
And this is how I can see that domino effect.
Yes.
It's crazy.
Or
Yeah.
us with
Wow.
language, like communicating, I need this. And someone just going, yeah, no, I'm not going to help you. No, you don't. I'm just going to leave you. Like,
Tap, you're
yep,
fine.
bye.
Wow. Yeah. It's so interesting. And you're right. No one would actually really do studies on that. Now, in terms of sleep hygiene, like I am quite obsessed with sleep. I will keep saying that. And I feel like I personally have a pretty good grasp on sleep hygiene when it comes to adults. It's certainly something that I talk about a lot in the pregnancy process program because sleep is so important to humans in general. And I know what sleep hygiene or good sleep hygiene looks like for adults. What does it look like for babies? How is it different?
Yeah, so we talk about the 3 E's. So we've got environment, emotions, and eating. Environment is the quick, easy fixes. So particularly for babies, especially around that 6 months age, they start to get really distracted. So we want as dark as possible a room. So blackout blinds, even cheap alternatives of garbage bags on the windows, tinfoil sticks really well with just water. So you don't have to spend big money on these expensive blackout blinds or shutters on the external of your house. But the black room is great for many reasons. It helps to start the production of melatonin, which really comes in at nighttime. But because we don't have that natural melatonin during the day for naps, which our babies need, we need to have that dark room to simulate nighttime. And it takes out that whole element of distraction. If they can't see anything in the room, they can't get distracted. And as simple as even I found with Finn, he was highly distractible. So I had to get black electrical tape and put it over all the little lights in the house. Like the monitor has a little red power light, put tape over it. If you've got like a power board or a PowerPoint that's got a light on it, I put tape over it. So even now he's 2.5 and everything still has black tape over it. Because for some babies, that slightest bit of light is enough when they're coming into that light sleep phase to go, bing, oh, I can see that. I'm awake now. So if you take out all of those elements, you can rule out that's why they're waking or taking a long time to fall asleep. So black room is the best. And I have lots of families ask, oh, when do we stop that? Even as adults, we sleep better in a dark room. So when you feel comfortable, if you want to take the things off the window to let some light in, do it. And it's really dependent on babies as well. The next thing is our noise level in the environment. So for babies, the womb is not a quiet space. There is whooshing of fluids and heartbeats, and it's not quiet. So when they come out into the real world, they're like, why is it so quiet? I love using white noise. And there's pink noise and there's white noise. So we recommend pink noise for babies under 6 months because the constant frequency is a little bit lower compared to our white noise, which has a little bit more variation in it. You can use both. It's not going to damage them or anything like that. And we recommend that it is no louder than 50 decibels, which is the same volume as a running shower. But this white noise breaks that silence for them so they feel like it's more like womb to world. But it's also great for eliminating those external noises in the house that can be enough to wake your baby, or the garbage truck that comes at 4 o'clock in the morning and wakes your baby up. So it helps you to be able to continue your life outside their room while keeping that consistent space in their room. And it's also it's all about what's happening when they're falling asleep for when they're waking up between those sleep cycles to continue sleeping. So if everything's the same from when they fell asleep, they can go, oh, yep, I can still hear that rain noise. It's still nice and dark. I can go back to sleep. If something has changed, then they're like, oh, where's that noise gone? So there's lots of white noise machines that have timers on them. Great to help them fall asleep. But if they're waking up and you want them to sleep for longer than 40 minutes and that noise is gone, they're like, oh, I must be time to stop sleeping because something's changed. So continuous white noise is great. And even some adults love sleeping with white noise. It's soothing. It helps to calm and relax and really helps with that regulation as well. And then the third part of the environment is the room temperature. So it is recommended to have your room temperature between 18 to 22 degrees Celsius. And again, this is dependent on bubs. We have hot sleepers, cool sleepers. Depends on when they're born in the year as well. If they're born in summer, they might respond a little bit worse to winter. And it's about finding that right fit. For some really sensitive bubs, 1 degree difference can make a huge difference to their sleep. I know Finn is on the warmer side. So if I have it any warmer than 20 degrees in his little sleep sack, he's like sweating. If it gets to 21, he's like, too hot, I'm awake. That's it. And look, we recommend that they sleep in TOG sleeping bags anyway, which are weighted and those sorts of things for different temperatures, but then having for winter a heater in their room, because no one wants to have an astronomical gas bill, especially at the moment, to have the central heating going in the house all night. And then fans or air conditioners for summer as well, just to keep it consistent. Some bubs don't care. Some are just so easygoing and go with the flow. It can be hot, it can be cold, whatever, they'll just sleep. We call those unicorns. I definitely did not have a unicorn. So that's our environment. So that's one big easy win part of our sleep hygiene. The next part is our emotions, and that's coming back to that co-regulation and that building that attachment and building that safe space and being that safe person that they can rely on, that if I'm communicating that I have a need, that need is going to be fulfilled. And we find as bubs get older, around that 9 months age, separation anxiety starts to creep in as well. So they start to realize that them and their primary caregiver, whether that's mum, dad, whoever looks after them most, aren't actually the same person. So before then, they just see them and their primary caregiver as an extension. They're just one being. They've now realized that, say, mum can go, but is she coming back? It's almost like that out of sight, out of mind. And there's this huge peak and fear of, oh my God, I can't see mum. Mum is gone. Mum is never coming back. And we find around this age that there is lots of resistance at bedtime, because bedtime is our longest stretch that we're spending away from our babies if they're not sleeping in our room. So there's this huge fear of mum's leaving me and she's never going to come back. So building that connection during that day, filling up that love cup during the day so that they are full and aware that I am loved, I am safe, my mum is still here, or my dad, and they will come back. And that eases within 4 to 6 weeks. But when that first hits, imagine that fear of your child, of the person who was always there, they're gone. So it's about building that connection during that day, lots of one-on-one time, bathing together, having some great skin to skin time helps with that regulation as well. And then the last part is our eating. So for our bubs under 6 months, it's about breast or formula feeding or mixed feeding, whatever feeding journey works best for you. And then over that 6 months, that introduction of solids and really making sure that they're getting enough nutrients for those sleepy foods. So we're wanting high magnesium, iron, and zinc, which are all really great for our sleep. And foods that are high in tryptophan as well are actually what we call sleepy foods. They actually help with that release of melatonin and start that sleepy process. So particularly lots of families I work with children around 12 months of age are really chat around these sleepy foods. So building them into dinner and afternoon snacks. And quite often I chat to families, if you've got a picky eater, having breakfast for dinner is the best meal for them. So thinking oats, banana, peanut butter, and milk, we would technically call that breakfast, but they are full of sleepy foods to help them feel full, slow release of that energy overnight, and it's really enhancing that production of melatonin and serotonin, helping them to be really restful in their sleep. Particularly with bubs over 6 months and families I work with, we really delve into what does your nutrition look like for your baby? Are they really struggling in taking solids? Is there something else going on that they're not really into eating? Are they getting too much milk now and there's not enough room for solids to be having it coming into their system as well? So it's finding that balance to make sure that these three parts of our sleep hygiene really come together.
Amazing. I feel like you've answered so many questions that I've had for you all in that one question. So now, but just briefly, because you've just mentioned magnesium, iron, and zinc and foods that are sleepy foods. You've mentioned oats, banana, peanut butter. Who doesn't love them? What other foods, seeing we're talking about food, what other foods would you recommend would be considered sleepy time foods?
Yeah, so we think things like, as I said, oats, bananas, nuts, legumes, chicken, turkey, eggs. These are all high in tryptophan, and we've got some great proteins in there as well. Things we want to avoid are things that are like really gassy. So like your leafy greens and your broccolis, that particularly you've got a sensitive bub, if this could upset their tummy, we need to be really careful when we're having those throughout the day. And quite often when we're starting to introduce solids, we recommend to have their first meal between their two naps of the day, so in that mid-morning. So they've got plenty of time for it to come through their system to not affect their overnight sleep if they're having a gut reaction, and also plenty of time during the day to see if they're having an allergic reaction as well to it. For some bubs, milk is not great before bed, even though it is high in tryptophan. If they're a little bit more sensitive to the lactose or the proteins in cow's milk, we want to avoid that for their overnight sleep. And the funniest thing I found when I was doing all this research around food is that custards is not great for kids before bed because of like the sugar content, and then it can really upset their tummy overnight. But those custards in those little pouches are the things that we often feed our kids as their dessert after dinner before bed. So it's about, and even for our older kids, offering desserts of like ice cream or chocolate before bed is going to spike all of that energy, upset the gut. And I've made a really conscious effort of switching this around in Finn's diet. So we have treats in the afternoon as part of his afternoon snack instead. He is a massive chocolate lover like I am, and it's offering him that earlier in the day rather than after dinner. Or offering it with dinner as well. So it's not as if you eat your dinner, then you can get your treat. It's all offered as part of the same meal. But we do really want to avoid the chocolates and the sugary things before bed. So we want to have a stable blood sugars overnight as well. And for breastfeeding mums in particular, looking at your caffeine intake and your chocolate intake as well, so that when are you having that throughout the day? And if you've got a really upset bub, it's so, as a exclusively breastfeeding parent, I fed Finn until he was 2, and he was an awfully gassy newborn, and the amount of things I cut out of my diet to try and help him. Haven't I given up enough already carrying you for 9 months, and now I've got to give up coffee and cow's milk and chocolate, all these things that are giving me life at the moment. But it's the sacrifices that we make for our little one because their gut is so underdeveloped. We need to give it time to develop and be able to process all of these things that come through our milk. And then as we start to introduce them as well. Yeah, really looking for those high tryptophan foods for mums as well that are breastfeeding later in the day. So that's coming through their breast milk too.
Wow, that's a very good point, isn't it? So eating those foods that are high in tryptophan, I've not heard of that before. Later in the day, that's such a good point. So then it comes through the breast milk. So essentially, what I'm picking up on, and I know from an adult's perspective, there are so many things that can affect your sleep, from stress, what time you ate before you went to bed, whether or not you have a regular sleep routine, regular like bedtime, regular wake time, your overall health and well-being, your environment that you sleep in. It sounds actually like your children and your infants and your babies, it's very similar to adults, and the same things affect your sleep as do the children. Would I be correct in that?
Yeah, absolutely. Even more so, like kids thrive on routine, and that predictability really helps them to set up their day. So on all of these things, and they're so new to the world that some slight changes can have a really big impact on some kids. Having, as you said, like a regular wake up time, and I recommend within a 30-minute buffer. So it doesn't have to be 7 o'clock on the dot every day, but within a 30-minute buffer, so that their internal body clock, their circadian rhythm can start to set. I'm like, okay, this is when we start our day. So that they're not waking overnight thinking, oh, it's time to wake up and it's 4:30 and let's start our day. So that regular wake up time is so important, and it sets you up for the rest of your day. And as a parent, and I always recommend following awake times for the first 10 to 12 months and really not having set schedules and routines, because you need to have some flexibility in your day. But if your child is waking up around the same time every day, you can have some rough predictability of what your day is going to look like. If you know they're going to nap at 10 o'clock, you can work around your morning. Or if you want to catch up with a girlfriend later, I'm like, oh, yep, I'll be free at this time. We'll be home for a nap at this time, but then we're free. So it's about, having those routines in place and that predictability. And especially around bedtime. Bedtime and overnight is when sleep is really hard because we're already tired. It's dark. In winter, it's cold. We don't want to be getting up and resettling. So having some predictability around bedtime and establishing really great bedtime routines help with that predictability for our kids. They start to know what comes next. Oh, and then I go to sleep. So having dinner an hour and a half to 2 hours before bed, so that it's not too far ahead that they're waking up hungry in the early hours of the morning, but it's giving them enough time to digest. So then it's ready to go for overnight sleep. Then having a bath or a shower 30 to 45 minutes before bed. Putting pajamas on. Some kids love a massage. That's great connection time before bed. Particularly for older bubs, I recommend some active playtime before bed to get those last bursts of energy out, and then settling in for, you might read 2 books together, have a cuddle, you might have a little song you sing, and then it's into bed. And if you're doing these same things every time, your kids start to then realize, oh, this comes next, and then I go to sleep. So that there's none of this uncertainty and worry about, oh, what's coming next, what am I doing now? Kids thrive off predictability and routine, and we see that they're happier when they know that, oh, I get to go to sleep now. And now is my wake up and playtime, and having really clear distinctions between sleep and playtime as well. And even for a lot of my families, I recommend having a nap routine. If they're really struggling with naps, having a short 10-minute nap routine before they go down. So similar to their bedtime routine, they might read a book, have a cuddle into their sleeping bag, and then off to sleep. So it's giving them that transition time between active play and 10 minutes just to start to calm and wind down before they can settle in for sleep as well. But screen time is a huge thing as well. I know I'm terrible as an adult. I will watch an episode of something in bed before I go to sleep. I do not practice what I preach. But for Finn, the TV is off minimum 2 hours before bed. So we need to really have that clear distinction. Even if it's just on in the background and he is off playing, it is off minimum 2 hours before bed. We need to have that time for that blue light to get out of our system so that melatonin can start. I love dimming the lights in the house. As soon as that TV is off and dinner is done, all the overhead lights are off. We turn on the lamps, we go in for bath, and it's setting the scene that it is time to calm. It's helping our body to start to produce that melatonin, because melatonin stops when light is introduced. So we want to start that early production of melatonin and setting the scene that it is time to calm and bedtime is coming.
Yeah, it's interesting. My sleep routine is quite routine. Where you mentioned before the 4:30, that's not time to wake up. I'm like, yeah, unless you're a PT.
Yeah.
4:30's a sleeping. But even with me, I find, because my sleep routine is quite regular and regulated, there are times when I don't need I don't want my melatonin to start kicking in, but I might be out for dinner and I can feel my melatonin kicking in, and I'm like, so it is very true. The more routine and the more regular you are, that melatonin will just kick in irrespective of like where you are or what you're doing. It's okay, time to sleep now. And from an adult's perspective, we know how important sleep is, from everything to do like your mental health, your hormones, your heart health, your metabolism, your immune system, and so many more. When it comes to infants and children, because of the huge developments they're doing, I can imagine that sleep would be even more instrumental. Can we talk a little bit around the science behind infant and child sleep and how it differs from adults, especially when it comes to like sleep regressions?
Yeah, I'll give you an example. So I actually took Finn to Masada Sleep School when he was 12 months old. So even I'd finished my certification, we'd had that sleep consultant help us out months earlier, but he was still waking overnight and I was just feeding him back to sleep. And it was just that I needed that external help overnight to go, okay, stop, you don't need to do this, we're going to step in. So he was 12 months. He was well established on solids, not eating a great deal though. He wasn't walking yet, which is fine. 12 months is early to begin walking. But the first night that he slept through, the next day was the happiest I'd ever seen him. He ate full meals. He was more active when we went to the park. And within a couple of months, he was walking. So all of these things just started to fall into place because he was getting the solid sleep that he needed. And I've recently come to talk about the difference between normal and common when it comes to sleep issues with kids. Quite often we'll see people, oh, that's just normal. It's normal for them to be waking 1 to 2 times overnight when they're 12 months old and still want an overnight feed. It's common, but it's not actually normal. He doesn't need that overnight feed. And because I was feeding him back to sleep like every 3 to 4 hours, he was not having full meals during the day because he wasn't that hungry. He was getting that disjointed sleep. So he wasn't able to make those connections in his development, which all happens while we're sleeping. And once you have those really solid sleep foundations in place, that they know that their routine is really set, they know what's coming, they can now self-settle and resettle overnight, and they're getting that solid sleep. When we come to those regressions and that development that comes later, yeah, they may still have a week or two where they're a bit off, but then they fall right back into place because all of those foundations are so solid. And once you have those solid foundations, they get through all these milestones a lot quicker and a lot easier. And temperament comes into that as well. Like Finn is highly sensitive. So when we came to things like teething, he was still really wakeful and it really affected him. But as soon as that was done, straight back to normal. Like he didn't need any extra assistance during that time, a couple of extra cuddles. But as soon as that passed, straight back to normal. So we do have what we call sleep regressions. They happen at 4 months, 6 months. We have that 8 to 10 month one that I talked about earlier with the separation anxiety, 12 months, 18 months, and 2 years. So the biggest one is the 4 month sleep regression, which is when our babies are coming out of that newborn phase. And we have what we call newborn sleep cycles, which can be longer, around that 5 to 6 hours. And their biological sleep cycles change to the same as us as adults. So their overnight sleep changes to 2 to 3 hourly cycles. So us as adults, we actually wake overnight as well, but we don't even notice it because we fall straight back into sleep. What we're finding with babies at that 4 month age is it's where parents start to really lose it, because they've gone from this sleepy baby that's finally stretched to maybe 5 hour stretches, and they're maybe waking for their feeds then. They're now waking every 2 hours, like, oh my God, my baby's broken. What is going on? But it's about their sleep. Yeah, it's broken. Help me. But they've biologically, their sleep cycles have now changed. And I've seen all these Facebook groups, oh, just wait it out. It'll come back around. This one will not fix itself. It is not like any other regressions that you do just have to wait for it to pass. If you're not going to make changes to how your baby is settling and resettling, they're not going to learn to independently connect that sleep cycle on their own. They're not going to, like we do as adults, come into that light sleep and reconnect and fall back into that deep sleep. If they are needing to be fed, rocked, packed to sleep at the beginning of the night, they're waking those 2 hours later looking for that same input, and it's not there. So it's the only one that you really have to make some changes if you want to see changes. So all the other ones are based around developmental milestones that children are having as well. So around 6 months, we're looking at them rolling and sitting. These can have a huge impact on sleep because finally everything's quiet and still. Oh, I can practice all my new skills now. So it's about giving them all of that active time during the day to practice all of their skills then, so they're so tired that they just sleep. And at 12 months, we're looking at pulling up to stand, and language development really starts to kick in around that 12 months. That 8 to 10 months is that separation anxiety, is that huge part there. So that's really about just filling that cup and giving that reassurance that I'm still here. 18 months is when separation anxiety peaks again. We have a few peaks of separation anxiety. So it's again building in that connection time. And particularly if your child has started daycare around this time, between that 12 to 18 months, it's really important to have that evening routine really set so that they have that, particularly when they're coming home from that busy day. And then the 2-year regression we went through with Finn, and it was the hardest part I've been through. I think because for a good 12 months we had such a dream sleeper, and then all the wheels fell off. And I'm like, oh my God, what is going on? He was taking hours to fall asleep. He was screaming at bedtime. And now they've got all this language, so they can actually call out mum, and it pulls on the heartstrings a little bit more. So they're not just crying, they're using their words. And you're like, oh, I'm so glad you can talk, but just go to sleep. And it's all about development, and sleep is never linear. So even though we got our dream sleeper at 12 months that was sleeping through, we went through all of these little milestones of little regressions as well, because sleep is always changing, because our babies and children are growing so rapidly, and we want to celebrate these milestones that they're walking and talking, and you're like, okay, sleep's going to be a bit off for a while until they get used to all of these newfound skills themselves. But if you've got those solid sleep foundations in place, it's so much easier just to keep to your routine and keep things going on track.
That's so interesting, isn't it? So it's all about routine. And I love that what you just said about common versus normal. I think that's a really good delineation, a really good distinction to actually understand what is common and what is normal. So I think that's a really good point. Now, you're talking a little bit about separation anxiety and that type of thing. And I don't know if I'm making a connection where there isn't one, but I personally have quite a big interest in attachment theory. I believe this is especially important when it comes to bonding with your baby. And I think bonding and separation anxiety, there might be something there. And I have done some research around attachment theory and sleep training, but I would actually really like your perspective on it, if you have one.
Yeah. Look, I am very much personally attachment and gentle parenting is me. And funnily enough, like my partner and I are a little bit different in this. And I'm very much about supporting Finn through his emotions and co-regulating with him, and that communication through everything. And it's really about moving away from those old standards and the comments of stop crying, suck it up, you'll be fine, stop whinging. And I find that really difficult as a parent, because I still hear those from my family towards Finn. And I have this deep understanding, it's taken me a long time to get here, that Finn is sensitive. He is slow to warm. There'll be times where we have family lunch and he won't give anyone a cuddle. Please do not demand that he gives you a kiss goodbye. You need to respect his boundary. And if you're going to force it, you're just going to push that separation between the two of you even more. You are not building that connection and relationship with him. And I guess this has all come from, I guess it's always been underlying for me as a parent. And that's where my anxiety came from, in that I was so worried that I wasn't building this deep attachment and connection with my baby when I was deep in my depression, that I loved him with all of my being, but I just had this overwhelming anxiety that I wasn't doing the right thing. Is this right? Am I getting him enough sleep? Am I feeding him enough? Do I need to cut this out of my diet to help his tummy? And I wanted to make sure that I was his safe person all the time. And that constant worry, and like it's still there now, like there's times where it ebbs and flows for me, but I know that he's definitely gone through separation anxiety. He has such a strong attachment with me that there are times that my partner won't even get a cuddle from him if I'm there. If he is upset and both my partner and I are there, it's me that he wants. Like yesterday, we took him to the skate park on his little trike, and he wanted me to hold his hand to go down the little hill. Dad, don't touch me. I want mum. And there's parts of me that are so proud that I have built that connection and attachment with him. Then other parts, I'm just like, I'm so exhausted. Like, just give me some space. There's a part where it's that fine line between clinginess, but I know that deep down it's his temperament, it's his personality. And I'm really proud of that attachment that I've built with him. And that all the things I've done along the way, like responding to him for his sleep, helping him co-regulate with his emotions, have all led to that. And like I talk through this with my psychologist all the time, because we've been on family holidays where he won't go with anyone else. He has to be with mum. If we're out for dinner, he has to be with mum. And I'm like, just please go sit with this person. And she's like, in the long run, even when he grows up, he's still going to care for you. He's still going to worry about you because you have built those foundations now. And like having a son, like there's me and my sister, there's 2 daughters in our family. Having a son, like all these things that I pick up the phone and call my mum for, I'm having a son. Is he going to pick up the phone and call me? Or is it going to be, if he's heterosexual, is it going to be his partner's mum that they call? Is it going to be the female's mum in the family that they're going to be calling? Like, I hope that the attachment that I've built, and through my gentle parenting of letting him feel and experience the world where he's at and not being told how he should be feeling because he's a boy in particular, I hope that my hope is that it's setting those foundations for us in the long run. And that's something that I really chat with families about, as well as, what is your style of parenting? Are you attachment gentle parents? Are you go with the flow? Like, where do you sit, and how do you want this to impact in your child's sleep as well? Because it all does have a connection. You can't be one way during the day and different at night. You can't be all about attachment and gentle parenting during the day, then it gets dark outside and it's deal with it yourself. I'll see you in the morning. It doesn't work. You got to send the same message all the time.
That's a really great point. I like that a lot. And now I heard recently something about, if you tune into your baby's patterns during pregnancy, that this can potentially help you predict their behavior during their newborn period. Have you got a perspective on this? Because I found that really fascinating when I heard that. I was like, wow, that's really interesting.
I haven't heard that before. And that is really interesting. And I'm just trying to think back to my pregnancy, and if there's anything that I was feeling during pregnancy that has resonated through to our newborn period. And the fact that he just wanted Cocoa Pops at 10 o'clock every night when I was pregnant. I don't know. And I think, like, I'm wanting to have another child, and I'm wanting to, and I want to have a redo. Like, I want to have a redo of my newborn period. Like, I want to have and I know it'll be different because now I have a toddler as well, but I want a redo of that 4th trimester. I want a redo of my pregnancy where I can share my pregnancy with everybody in the world, not at home by myself. And I want to have a more positive, it's not that it wasn't positive, but I feel like I know more now and am more aware of what I want and what I need, and being able to communicate those needs, that I'd love to be able to, in my next pregnancy, really tune in and see if that does come through to our 4th trimester too.
I really hope that you get that chance. Yeah, especially if it's a want that you really have. I really hope that you get to experience that, because I know that COVID did really create a lot of isolation, and I definitely know that it increased the rates of postnatal anxiety and depression incrementally increased them. I really hope that you do get to experience that. And before we wrap up, I've got maybe 2 more questions for you. And the first one would be, what are your top 3 tips when it comes to sleep?
Okay. Top 3 tips. First one, as the parent, if you are suffering sleep anxiety, if you are the one that is stressing about sleep, put some things into place for you. So if it's around, if you know that your little one's going to take 30 minutes to an hour to fall asleep, put some headphones in, listen to a podcast, listen to an audiobook, tune out and settle into it. And don't stress about, there's an hour of my night that's gone. Really settle into it, give into it, and give your child the support that they need. My next thing is, find a sleep consultant that if you are going down the sleep consultant route and getting that help, find one that aligns with you and you feel like is really listening to your needs and is going to look at the whole picture for you and not just give you a cookie cutter routine. Every baby is different. Some babies will just fit into that cookie cutter here's your printout, off you go. But you want to make sure that it's fitting for you and your family and your baby in particular. And the next one is leading on with that. Every baby is different. If you are Googling await times and it says it's got to be an hour to an hour and a half, but your baby is happy at an hour 45, don't stress about it. Every baby is different. You don't have to do what your mum's group is doing. Find what works for you. Be happy with that and advocate for yourself that if it's working for you, don't worry about what everyone else is doing. If feeding to sleep is working for you, you don't have to stop. It's only when it's no longer working for you and your family, that's when you make the choice to make those changes.
I love that. That's a really good point. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's excellent. And just one last question, and that would be, what's the one thing that you wish women knew before they had a baby?
It is hard. You can be so prepared, but God, it's hard. Like nothing can prepare you for the sleep deprivation, for the pain of trying to breastfeed. But I wish I knew that it was okay to ask for help, that you're not failing if you're asking for help. You're actually doing the best thing for you and your baby by reaching out. Don't suffer in silence on your own.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And again, it's a common theme. I've certainly heard that before. You need to ask for help. And I think too many people believe that they need to be self-sufficient, and too many people struggle to ask for help or put their hand up and say, hey, I need some help over here. And the right people will tune into that. Not everyone knows how to respond to that. Hey, I need some help over here. And that's not a you thing. I think the strength actually comes from saying, hey, I actually need some help over here. And it's not weak to be asking for help. And the right people will respond to you in the right way. And if people don't respond to you in the way that you need, that's not a reflection of you either. I think that's really important to remember. So thank you so much for your time today. It has been such an interesting conversation, and I feel like I've learned so much about sleep. And it is quite interesting, the connections between adult sleep and infant sleep. So I really think that by implementing so many of the things that you're talking about, it would absolutely carry through to adulthood. And I think what you do with infants and with toddlers and children around their sleep can certainly impact them for their entire lives. So it's why it's so important. So thank you so much for your time today and sharing so much amazing knowledge. It's been really great to talk to you.
Thank you for having me. I've really loved it.
And if you're hearing this message, I want to say a huge thank you, because it means that you've listened to this entire episode. Of course, if you have any questions about the things that we covered in this episode, or want to know more about me or my other projects, you can find me on YouTube and Instagram at The Pregnancy Process. For those currently in their conception or pregnancy journey, you can actually apply to join my complimentary but private community, the Preggy Training Crew. And you'll find my community application and social media links in the episode description. And of course, if you enjoyed this episode, I absolutely encourage you to share it with other women just like you. And I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.